What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on a Thursday morning, October 3rd, 2024. Getting ready for Oregon versus Michigan State on Friday night out in Eugene, Oregon at Autzen Stadium. Ducks return home for another home game. And joining me to preview tomorrow's game is Kenny Jordon, beat reporter for Spartan Mag, part of the On 3 network. Kenny, how we doing, man? Thanks for being here.
Good, good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Excited to bring you on and share your perspective on the Spartans ahead of this week's game. A lot of my listeners, they all know about the Ducks. I know about the Ducks, but I want to bring you on to educate the audience about all things Spartans ahead of Friday night's game in Eugene. So a good way that I always like to start these things off is just kind of getting a vibe check, asking what the tone is of the fan base out there in East Lansing with 5 games under their belt.
Yeah, I'd say the vibe right now is just not letting the this losing streak snowball too much. I guess there's been some positives. So yeah, I'd say the vibe right now overall is pretty good. With the
Well, looks like we might have lost Kenny for a second. He might be getting a call or a text. This happens sometimes.
Sorry, yeah, somebody was calling me. Sorry.
No worries, man. Just hop right back in where you were at.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that the vibe right now with the fans, there's been a lot of positives. Obviously, lost last 2 games, but overall, I'd say pretty positive with some of the developments that have been being made. Even last week against Ohio State, it ended up being a blowout a little bit, but they played a little bit closer than it's been in the years past. So, there's good things that a lot of people I think are taking away from it so far.
Okay, yeah, and it's not exactly an easy schedule for the Spartans. Obviously, drawing Oregon and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks, and now you have to go on the road. And a lot of people, Kenny, are kind of viewing this as Oregon's first real Big Ten game because you played UCLA last week, a game that you probably could have won by more points than you did, but they were able to take care of business out there in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl against a familiar face. But now the Spartans come to town, and that is a somewhat familiar face for them. I think the last time they played was in the Red Box Bowl. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was at that game because it was in the Bay Area where I'm from. And I got to tell you, Kenny, that was one of the hardest games I've ever had to watch in my life.
Yeah, no, it was hard to watch that from home even.
But we got, hopefully we'll get a better game here on Friday. And obviously, one of the big storylines around the Spartans is you bring in a new head coach in Jonathan Smith. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain about Jonathan Smith because I know a little bit about him from his time at Oregon State. Obviously, he was a fixture there in Corvallis for a number of years. But now that he comes over to East Lansing, it feels like he is kind of open to a whole new world. He's in a big conference, one of the Power Two of today's college football, right? And he's got more resources. And he's always been a guy, from my understanding, that does more with less. So tell me about your impressions of Jonathan Smith and kind of how he operates through 5 games.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good description of it from what I've seen of him so far. Yeah, there's a lot of uh, addition, subtraction from the transfer portal this past off season, and even worse in the springtime. So I think they ended up with 61 new players on the team this season, which I think was seventh most. I want to say among FBS teams, but so yeah, it was definitely kind of a makeshift roster that he had to put together. But he got, there was some talent that came in through the transfer portal. But yeah, I think that his offense has been, there's been a lot of kind of minor, you know, mistakes, but you can see the end goal in sight, I guess, with him. He's very process driven too, I think, where it's like, day by day type deal where it's not looking too far in the future. Um, but yeah, he's had some development, and it'll be interesting to see how he does against Oregon, which is a team obviously he's familiar with as well.
And there's a lot of connections between these two programs heading into this game. We obviously talked just now about Jonathan Smith and then how he knows Oregon, and the Ducks have a fairly good grasp of kind of what he brings to the table as a coach as well from all their matchups over the years. But the connections that I was going to talk about, you have a couple, right? You have Demetrius Martin, who was on the Oregon staff as the cornerbacks coach a couple years under Dan Lanning. You also have Derek Harmon, who is one of the new defensive linemen for Oregon, who transferred over from Michigan State after one of the more dramatic recruitments in the transfer portal. He was in the portal, he was staying, and he was back in the portal. So it's been a whirlwind of an offseason, I think, for both programs. And I also want to say Ben Roberts transferred to Michigan State, if I'm remembering that correctly, another
Yep.
defensive lineman that played for the Ducks. So, yeah, maybe we can just start there with a couple of thoughts on, whatever you want to say. You can talk about Derek Harmon. You can talk about Coach Meat and kind of what you've seen from him in the corners. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with Harmon. Yeah, that was definitely teeter totter type thing. Him and Simeon Barrow, who ended up going to Miami, both defensive tackles that were pretty productive last year. That were in the portal, and then they came back, and then after spring ball happened, they re-entered the portal, and he ended up out at Oregon, which that it was a good fit for him, I think, and wanting right away. But yeah, I do like the addition of Ben Roberts too. It kind of, he's got a little bit more eligibility left versus Harmon. So with the Smith, this is kind of a rebuilding year. I hate to say that. I don't like to say it honestly. But you know, towards the future, that was definitely a good move by him to go out and get Ben Roberts, who looked like I had seen that it looked like he was one of the starters for Oregon in spring ball. If I could be wrong on that, but
He was
uh,
someone that I remember. He was a little bit of a surprise entry for me because he was someone who came to Oregon in 2022. You hear good things about him. He made some plays in the spring, so I thought that he was someone that was really in line to take a bigger role this year. But then the Ducks got uh, Derek Harmon, who we just talked about. They got
right.
Jamar Caldwell from Houston in the transfer portal, and really beefed up their defensive line. And then they have some other promising guys like Amari Washington at the position. So I guess maybe he just kind of saw the writing on the wall, or maybe it was a more difficult path to snaps than he had wanted. So it seems like Ben Roberts to Michigan State is a pretty solid fit for him.
Yeah, I think it was a good fit. They got a lot of, like I said, it kind of makeshift type transfers where I know they were trying to get a lot of guys that had multiple years of eligibility, more so for that future, which Ben Roberts fits that bill. But yeah, and then Demetrius Martin too. That was a pretty good hire, I think. He's been one of the better recruiters so far. It seems like with his connection to the West Coast and everything. He he's a former Michigan State player actually. He played in the '90s at Michigan State, so obviously there was always that connection there too. And yeah, he's had a difficult time so far trying to keep some of his guys healthy at corner, but uh, they've been pretty solid. Charles Brantley actually has been one of the more surprising players on the team, cornerback, and he's a returner. He's been at Michigan State for a few years, but yeah, the corners have played well. altogether, despite the injuries and everything, though. So a lot of promise from him too.
Yeah, and Demetrius Martin worked with a couple of really good players during his time at Oregon. Christian Gonzalez being the crown jewel of those efforts. He's now in the NFL playing for the New England Patriots, and he's one of the bright spots on a really, really struggling team. I took a little bit of a closer look at the Patriots last week because they played my San Francisco 49ers on their Sunday matchup. So he's been doing really well. And then Kyrie Jackson, before he tragically passed away, he was really on the right path as well. So I think that's a great addition for Jonathan Smith. And then to be able to bring back a coach that played at that school, I think that's such a great way to go about building your staff. So expecting big things from Michigan State as well moving forward. We got to talk a little bit now, Kenny, about if we're talking about the future, what position is more important than quarterback? So we got to talk about Aiden Childs, who's running that Spartans offense out there in East Lansing. He's a guy that I actually got to see a little bit coming out of high school, seeing that he's in Southern California where I'm located. I watched one of the crazy games that he played in his high school career. It was Downey, where he went to high school, against Warren, which was the school that brought us Nico Iamaleava, the current Tennessee quarterback. So that was a heated rivalry, crazy game, but I came away thinking one thing from that game, and that's that Aiden Childs can play. So I know it's been a bit of a rough start for him out there with the Spartans, but just kind of give me your take on what you've seen from him, and maybe we can kind of focus a little bit more on what we saw from that Ohio State game.
Yeah, Aiden's definitely a loose cannon a little bit. You know, that he didn't start any games last year, so 5 games and he's made 5 starts now. But yeah, like I said, loose cannon a little bit, but obviously that athleticism is on display quite a bit. You know, he makes some great plays. He makes some plays that you don't quite know about, but he's a young kid still. Just turned 19 actually, so he's a young graduate from high school. He came into Oregon State last year at 17. Uh, but yeah, he's slowly starting to, last week he played a lot better than he did the week before against Boston College to Ohio State. He played better against Ohio State. But yeah, he's had some issues with just decision making and things like that, which, is normal. And he hasn't been Michigan State hasn't been helped out with him either, with receivers going down with injuries. I know the Boston College game, I think they were without four of their top 5 receivers, and different things like that can be a little challenging, especially for a young quarterback.
Yeah, and so I've seen the flashes. He had some impressive throws even in that Ohio State game as well. So even though he's really turning the ball over a lot, I think that's something that's easy for a lot of fans to kind of uh, latch onto and kind of center their analysis in that. I think that's a fair point, but when you're in kind of a rebuilding year, like you mentioned with Michigan State, I think you got to be able to look at the bigger pictures and see some of that promise that he
Right.
brings to the table as a quarterback. And just to kind of talk a little bit about Oregon here, gosh, if I'm Aiden Childs and I'm going from facing Ohio State to facing the Oregon defense in back-to-back weeks, it's really not getting any easier, because that is one of the best front sevens in all of college football. I think we're at kind of a weird stage right now, Kenny, where I feel far more confident in Oregon's defense than their offense, just from a consistency standpoint. You talk about Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Jordan Birch, guys like that have just been incredible so far. And now you couple that with the ascension of Devin Jackson, a young linebacker, Bryce Betcher, who got drafted in the MLB draft but chose to come back for one more year. He's a Eugene native, so means a lot to him. And then now you look like you're getting your best play out of Jeffrey Bossa after he got rolled up on in that Idaho game, and Justin Jacobs as well. It seems like this defense is kind of finding their stride a little bit, and it's gonna be a tough game, it seems like, for Aiden Childs with the pressure that he's probably going to be facing.
Yeah, definitely won't be easy. Yeah, like you said, going from Ohio State and then you got to go out to Oregon, 2 top 10 teams. Both Big Ten favorite. Been the Big Ten favorites for the last 5-6 months or whatever. So yeah, it definitely doesn't get much easier. You're definitely gonna have to try to build off some of those positives from the Ohio State game that they had early on, and yeah, just try to build off that and see where it takes you.
Before we get any farther in today's show, want to give a big thank you and shout out to one of our sponsors here on the Ducks Dish podcast, and that is Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' dinner plans are tonight, but you got to head on over to Ranchito Grill at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard, and you know what you got to try? I'm going to tell you, it's the homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. We're back here on the Ducks Dish podcast. Max Torres of ScoopDuck on 3 talking with Kenny Jordon of Spartan Mag, part of the On 3 network, getting you ready for the Oregon versus Michigan State game on Friday. Maybe you're at the gym, maybe you're doing some chores around the house, maybe you're heading over to Eugene from Portland on Friday night. However you're listening to this, wherever you're listening to it, we greatly appreciate it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're tuned in to the podcast. So let's keep it rolling, Kenny. We got a couple of questions from our ScoopDuck subscribers. We got an awesome message board community over there. So if you guys haven't already, you definitely got to go check us out at scoopduck.com. First one comes from DD99, who asks, this will kind of toss this to you, Kenny. How do you see the matchup with Michigan State's run game developing?
Like just in terms of this game.
Yeah, I think just if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about where you think Michigan State's run game is at and some of the guys that we got to know about there.
Yeah, run game's not been great. Wasn't great last week, but uh, yeah, K'Ron Lynch Adams transfer from UMass, I believe. He's kind of taken over a little bit. Him and uh, yeah, he's kind of taken over a little bit, and but Michigan State has definitely had a hard time running the ball, which probably hasn't helped Aiden Childs either. And against a front seven like Oregon has, definitely not going to be any easier than it has been. Um, and the offensive line's been banged up a little bit too, so they're starting freshman at left tackle actually. So that'll be interesting as well to see how that shapes out for them.
Sounds like a little bit of trial by fire for this Michigan State offense with the true freshman at left tackle, like you mentioned, and then having Aiden Childs out there. For Oregon, they've done a really good job for the most part, at least in recent weeks, of developing the run. I think that people will look at that Boise State game and the phenomenal performance that Ashton Genty had. And I mean, at this point, when is this guy not having a phenomenal performance? He is very well in the mix for the Heisman Trophy Award. And that win over Boise State for Oregon just seems to be getting better every single week as Boise State really continues to take care of business. But then the Ducks got Oregon State, a team that they knew was going to run the ball a lot. And they were kind of doing their thing in the first half, ran for over 100 yards, but then they ran for only 16 yards in the second half. So great adjustments by the Oregon staff there. And then they really bottled up a struggling UCLA offense last week. So I've got confidence they'll be able to take care of business against the Spartans come Friday night. Have another one. This is a bit of a two-parter, Kenny. But we have a question from Young Grotti who would like to hear about Michigan State's top NFL prospects and freshman impact players, if there are any that we can discuss.
Top NFL prospects, yeah, probably Jack Velling, I guess. I know he was kind of rated pretty highly in the before the season. Oregon State transfer, I'm sure you guys know. Yeah, he's the only one I really think of off the top of my head right now. The team's pretty young still, so there's a lot of guys that are kind of like in between, not quite on those radars quite yet. But Malik Spencer too, I guess, the safety. I think I've seen his name tossed around a little bit by some of those NFL draft guys. So I'd say those two for sure. But then top freshman, definitely Nick Marsh, wide receiver. He had a big game against Maryland a few weeks ago. And him, he was I think, yeah, he was the highest rated uh, recruiting class. So it was big for Jonathan Smith to be able to keep him when he got hired here. He was out against Boston College, didn't play, and then last week was limited. And I think he played one series against Ohio State, had two catches. He might have played two series, but he had two catches, I believe. But yeah, he's an impact freshman, and then Rakeem Johnson, who I mentioned, um, he's going to be starting at left tackle, I believe, again this week. He started last week at left tackle as well. Um, he is a guy that, not a lot of fans from Michigan State fans' perspective really knew about him up until this past week, really, because he was a Jim Haljack recruit out of Oregon State, and then followed followed him out to Michigan State when they made that move. He's from Idaho, Boise, Idaho, I believe. Not highly, I think somewhere in like 1,200 rated recruit or whatever, but he's been mentioned quite a bit by the coaching staff throughout fall camp, and just his ability to play different positions and learn the different positions at such a young age, because he actually came in as a center and now he's playing left tackle. Um, but yeah, those two I'd say are the two impact guys.
Okay, great to know. Great to know. I remember knowing about Nick Marsh when he was coming out of high school because I believe he's from the Detroit area. So that's certainly a guy that's of the utmost importance for the Spartans to keep in state, especially when you have to battle Michigan for some of these top guys in state. So he's a guy that I've definitely heard about for that big game that you mentioned, Kenny. He caught 8 passes for 194 yards and a touchdown against Maryland early last month, a narrow 27-24 win for the Spartans. So appreciate the questions from the subs over at ScoopDuck and your insight there, Kenny. I want to talk about the defense a little bit for Michigan State, and I'll talk about the offense for Oregon when we do that, and then maybe we'll wrap up with a bit of a score prediction today. So tell us a little bit about that Michigan State defense and where you feel like they're kind of at right now.
Yeah, the defense has actually played pretty well, honestly. Last week, like I said, the game got away a little bit against Ohio State, but they were first half they were putting them into some third and long situations, and making some stops early on. But yeah, the defense as a whole, I think has been more productive, like you were saying about Oregon, than the offense has for Michigan State as well. Joe Rossi's the defensive coordinator for Michigan State, came from Minnesota, and he's done a really good job with that unit altogether. And then Demetrius Martin, his cornerbacks have uh, played a little bit better than I guess most were expecting, and the defensive line has actually looked a lot better too, which was a huge concern, losing Derek Harmon in the portal, and then Simeon Barrow also left and went to Miami. So they kind of had a makeshift couple guys, some guys that don't have a whole lot of experience, but they're kind of gadget moving guys around and figuring out what they're good at and things like that. And they've played better than expected for the most part, I would say.
All right. So the arrow seems to be trending up, or at least in the right direction for that Michigan State defense. As for the Oregon offense, that they're coming off of a pretty strong, but I'd say incomplete showing against UCLA. And it's so funny, Kenny, to be critical of a team or of the off. Like you can only be so critical of a team that's 4-0, but at the same time, you have to take into account all the expectations that were on this Oregon team before the year. And I think the more people I've talked to, it seems like Oregon's kind of trying to hold some things in close to the vest before that Ohio State game next week, which makes sense. But at the same time, even if you're rolling out something that's kind of more vanilla, if you will, schematically, I think you'd expect Oregon to look a little bit more dominant than they have, especially in the run game. That they haven't had too many explosive runs. I don't think that those lanes have quite been there compared to last year, but we know offensive line is a developmental position, so maybe they'll get better
Right.
as time goes. We're going to keep an eye out for Matthew Bedford, who was an Indiana transfer offensive lineman. I'm sure you're a little bit familiar with that name, being out in Big Ten country. He transferred to the Ducks this offseason and was kind of projected to be that starting right guard, but they haven't gotten to see him too much just yet because he got injured in fall camp, and then he was good to go and got some snaps actually in the Boise State game. I think maybe it was towards the end, or maybe it was the Oregon State game, but we're kind of waiting to see if he's going to come back, and I don't really expect to see him tomorrow, especially if this is a game that Oregon should be able to handle relatively easily. But I'm looking for Oregon to improve in the run game. I want Evan Stewart to get some more targets because he is a supreme talent, but he just hasn't touched the ball a whole lot so far this season. So that's kind of where things are at for the Oregon offense. I think Dylan Gabriel looks a lot more comfortable. We're seeing him move around in the pocket and doing a good job taking care of the ball. So I think that the Oregon offense, you feel good about where they're at, but there's still some meat left on the bone through the first 4 games here for Will Stein and the Oregon offense. So I want to kind of put us on the spot here, Kenny. I want to get into a score prediction for tomorrow night's game. I don't know if you're traveling out to Eugene. I won't be in Eugene, but I'll be there the next week for Ohio State. What are we thinking about a score prediction for tomorrow night's contest?
Yeah, no, I will not be going out there. But we do have my boss will be out there, the publisher Jim Camperoni. But yeah, I would say I don't know, 37 to 20. Oregon wins, and but yeah, I think that it'll be relatively closer than what I guess Vegas has predicted. What I don't know what the spread is at the moment at 24.5 maybe.
I can check right now.
But yeah, I think that Michigan State will make it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, at the end of the day, Oregon has some players that I just don't think Michigan State will be able to contain for that long of a game. Dylan Gabriel being one, and yeah, I think that by the second half, Oregon will be start clicking offensively, and that I've never been there obviously, but I've heard that that's a pretty loud environment, pretty tough place to play by some of the coaches at Michigan State now, and Aiden Childs was actually talking about it a little bit too. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, Oregon will overmatch Michigan State. 37-20 is my guess.
Okay, not too far off from my score prediction, which I posted earlier this week over on ScoopDuck for the listeners or the readers over at ScoopDuck. We always have those predictions usually out on Wednesday. So I've got 42-17 Oregon over Michigan State. And after seeing some of the other predictions on the site, I wonder if I might be giving too much credit to that Michigan State offense. But who knows? I feel like better to be a little bit more generous than underestimating it, I guess. I think this Oregon offense should be able to kind of blow this one open. I think a lot of fans would be excited to see them break 50. We haven't seen Dante Moore too much this year, so I think that would be something fans are going to keep their eye on. Is this a game that they can kind of blow open and get him some important snaps as they aim to use another red shirt for him, because he didn't use a red shirt last year at UCLA. But yeah, I think I could see this one maybe being a little bit close out of the gates early on, Kenny, and then Oregon kind of putting it away and hopefully being able to kind of slam the door and dominate the middle eight, because they have not been able to do that, at least consistently so far this year. And that was something they did a heck of a job at last year. So those are our 2 score predictions. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, Kenny, can you just tell us a little bit about Spartan Mag and what you guys have going on over there right now? Because if you're subscribed to ScoopDuck, then you can check everything out over at Spartan Mag as well.
Yeah, we have a great team actually. we, exciting stuff going on with John. The first year Jonathan Smith. Last year was you know kind of rough with everything going on, but yeah, a lot of exciting stuff with Jonathan Smith recruiting. And then the team, obviously, too. I think that our team coverage of Michigan State is better than anybody in the Michigan State market. And yeah, have a lot of interviews and different analysis and things like that all on the site. And the Underground Bunker, which is our forum, is one of the best communities in the Michigan State market, in my opinion. A lot of good people there with a lot of good insight as well. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, I'd go over there and check it out.
Right on, right on. Well, yeah, if you guys are looking to find more about Michigan State, no better place to head over than to SpartanMag.com, where you can find more of Kenny's work with the rest of the squad over there. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on any social media platform at mtorresports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel and come and see us at ScoopDuck.com for the very best in Oregon football and recruiting coverage. But yeah, Kenny, can't thank you enough for coming on and giving us some of your time and sharing your perspective on the Spartans ahead of tomorrow night's game. And thank you to you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.
Yep. Thanks for having me.